Hi everybody, it's Geordie from Geordie's Cards here for Pawsome Stamps today, and I am creating this lovely card featuring the new Mandala stamp set from Pawsome Stamps. This stamp set is absolutely stunning and it's very large. It measures 5 inches by 5 inches, so it is going to really be the star of the show with any card that you create with it, but it can be a little bit intimidating. So when I first saw it, I was a little bit concerned about how I was going to use it. So I'm here today to give you some tips and tricks on using this gorgeous stamp to create a lovely card. So to start with, I have cut a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock. I've cut it to 6 inches by 6 inches. I am going to trim it down later, but I wanted it nice and large so that I had plenty of room to maneuver my stamp around and to decide what to do with it afterwards. I hadn't really got that far yet. I am using a Versafine Onyx black ink and clear embossing powder to heat emboss my mandala onto my cardstock. This is because I am using Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers today, and I find that if I emboss the image onto the cardstock, then it stops the ink from running into each other. These are water-based inks, so they can move around a little bit, and if you've got that kind of well that is created by the embossing powder, it makes life a little bit easier. So I decided to tackle this mandala by using a color palette. So this is the color palette that I chose, and then I picked out 6 markers that match that color palette. So the first one I have, sorry, these are a little bit blurry, though I do realize and go back and put my hand under it so you can see it. So this one is Scarlet Red. I have pink. I also am using the Peacock Blue. I have the bright yellow. I have violet. And finally, I have turquoise green. And I'm also using the blender pen. And you don't need to use the blender pen. You can use a water brush or just some water and a paintbrush. I like using the blender pen because I find it's a little bit more controllable. Obviously, you can also colour this in Copic markers. If you are to colour in Copic markers, I would recommend using 2 shades of the same colour, so one darker, one lighter, so that you can create some depth and dimension. I get that from the zigs just by blending the colour out so that I get a darker part and a lighter part, which you'll see here when I put the purple down. But yeah, I would recommend, you know, having at least 2 markers to create a little bit of a shadow effect as well. So tips for creating a mandala or colouring a mandala. First of all, choose a colour palette. It makes life so much easier. You want a colour palette that has about 5 or 6 colours. So the one I've used today has 6 colours. I only used that Scarlet Red very, very minutely. You hardly notice it. I've used it right in the centre there, and I'm using it right at the edges. So 5 would be more than enough, but 5 or 6 is perfect. You can find colour palettes on Pinterest very easily, and you can search up different themes. So for example, you might want to do a spring colour palette or a winter colour palette. You might want to do a tonal colour palette or a bright colour palette like I've done today. But they're very easy to find. You'll be given loads and loads of options. The hard thing is choosing one. But once you've decided on your colour palette, then you want to choose your markers that match that colour palette. Once you've done that, you're all set to start colouring. But before you do start colouring, think about how your markers are going to work together, how your colours are going to look together. So, for example, I used my purple to colour in my petals and the centre of my mandala. I'm going to use that purple for all of the petal shapes on my mandala. So you will see that as you move outwards, out towards the edge of the mandala, there are more petal shapes as you go out. And for each of those, I'm going to use purple. And I just find that this makes the mandala a little bit more cohesive and looks a bit more put together than if you just randomly place colours wherever. But obviously, you know, there's no rhyme or reason to this. Just do what feels right. Have a play around. At the end of the day, it's only cardstock and ink, so it's no real big deal if you do make a big mistake and you have to start again. And colouring these is so relaxing. It's really therapeutic. You do kind of just get into a bit of a zen-like state. It's a lot of fun. But what I tried to do was I wanted my darker colours separated from each other a little bit. So I didn't want to put 2 dark colours right next door to each other. So I tried to keep my purple separated from my Peacock Blue, for example, so that they weren't sitting right next door to each other. Otherwise, they would kind of get lost in amongst each other. I'm using that yellow color to do all of the kind of outline parts of my mandala, if that makes sense. And you'll see that as we go through. So I'm trying to repeat colors onto the same sort of areas of the mandala, if that makes sense, or the same sort of patterns of the mandala. The bright pink is just going to be used in a few places as a nice bright pop of color, and then my turquoise green is going to be used to kind of fill in most of the large open spaces. So again, you'll see all of this as we go through and how it works together. But it was a lot of fun to colour this, and as I say, I was a little intimidated when I first saw it, but once I got into it, I had a blast and I really, really enjoyed it. But if you're worried about colouring, you can use this mandala in so many different ways. So some of the ways that I've been thinking of since I had it, and I'm desperate to try these out, you could simply white heat emboss this mandala onto some coloured cardstock. I think it would look amazing on like a dark blue cardstock with a white heat embossing, or even gold or silver heat embossing. And you could just keep it like that, keep it really simple, and it would just look so elegant and pretty. You could also create a kind of background using inks or like Distress Oxide, or even like a water-based background, and just kind of go to town with the colors and then stamp the mandala on top of that. And that would look really, really cool as well. I think that would be a lot of fun. You can also cut this mandala up and use pieces of it to create a background. So imagine cutting it in half or in quarters and then placing those quarters around your card to create an interesting effect. I think it would look really amazing. So many different ways of using this. I am going to have so much fun with this stamp set. I cannot wait to keep playing around with it and try some new different things. But those were just some of the ideas that I thought about and thought would look really, really nice. Okay, so you can see here I've gone back in with my yellow. So this is what I was talking about. The outer edges, I'm going to do all kind of that yellowy color. And then my inner pieces, I'm bringing out my turquoise green again, and I'm going to color this part turquoise green. This way, as I say, it kind of keeps the image looking quite cohesive, like it all goes together, and it's not kind of just a big mashup of colors. Having said that, I would love to see somebody just go to town and color this in like rainbow colors. And yeah, I think it would look really, really neat. I don't think you can go too wrong with this. But just if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, then a color palette is a really great place to start to think about different colors that you know are going to work well together and will help you decide exactly how you want to color it. Okay, so let me give you some tips on using Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers specifically. You will see that as I use these markers, I just place a tiny bit of color down just where I want it to be the darkest, and then I use my blender to blend that out and push the color towards the end. As it moves out, it gets lighter, so you get that nice light and dark effect, so a shade and a lighter part, and it just looks really, really lovely, and it's very easy to do. You can, of course, get the same effect from using a water brush and water, but I just find the blender marker much easier and much more controllable for me. I'm no expert at watercoloring, so I find this way is the easiest for me to manage. I am just cleaning my blender marker off onto that scrap bit of cardstock I've got underneath there as I go along, to make sure that I don't get too much color where I don't want it, and just to make sure that it all kind of evens out. Once I have chosen to do one color, I just do the same thing all the way around the mandala and keep everything looking the same. You could, of course, alternate colors. I think that would look really nice. I mean, as I say, you can really go to town with this and make it your own. The only other thing I would say when using Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers is make sure that you use Bristol Smooth cardstock to color on. It will make a huge difference. I have tried a number of different cardstocks and none of them work anywhere near as well as the Bristol Smooth cardstock does. I don't know why. I'm not sure what the reason is behind it. I have tried watercolor cardstocks. I've tried cardstock for alcohol-based markers. I have tried just normal white cardstock. It doesn't work anywhere near as well as the Bristol Smooth does. It makes a huge difference. So if you are struggling with your zigs, invest in some Bristol Smooth cardstock and you may find that it will make a huge difference to you. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the colouring of the mandala now, and I've just got a little bit of pink really left to do, and then those outer circles which are going to be done in that same Scarlet Red that I used for the very centre of my mandala. I just wanted to bring some of that colour out because I haven't used it again apart from that very middle bit, so I thought it would look nice to bring that colour out to the outside of the mandala as well. I decided to do these bits in pink just because I thought that it kind of matched the same sort of shape that it was that I used the pink for in the center of the mandala. And as I say, it's nice to use similar colors on similar kind of pieces of the mandala, if that makes sense, so that it looks cohesive. Okay, so all that's left is that Scarlet Red color, and I'm just going to attach that to those little balls on the outside, and then that is my coloring complete. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think it looks lovely. The color palette worked really, really well. Just goes to show that using a color palette can really help. I would never have come up with this color combination on my own, so I'm really thankful to that color palette. Okay, so now that my mandala is complete, I am going to trim this piece of cardstock down. I've trimmed it so that it is 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 inches. There's about 1/8 of an inch around each edge of the mandala. And then I've cut a piece of blue cardstock, which I'm using as my card base. This one measures 5 1/2 by 5 1/2 inches, so that I'm going to have a nice little border all the way around, which shows that dark blue cardstock through. I chose this dark blue because I thought that it helped make all the other colors pop really nicely, and it kind of, you know, just makes the mandala stand out. Once that was done, I went and heat embossed my sentiment onto some black cardstock. I chose the Hello Beautiful sentiment and I cut it with a little banner die. And now I'm just trying to figure out where I'm going to pop that sentiment. I can't decide. I tried the top, I tried the bottom, I tried the center. In the end, I went for the center, and I'm going to pop it up on some foam tape because I just wanted to add a little bit of dimension there, just to create a little bit of a subtle difference between the background. But I'm just popping that down, and that is it. My card is done. All that I need to do is to trim out another piece of white cardstock to pop in the middle so that I can write my sentiment inside. And that is it. My beautiful mandala card is finished, and I really love how it turned out. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up. Please feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and please do subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you come back and join me again. Thanks so much. Take care.